Hey guys, this video is a quick tutorial. I was about to warp my loom for a project, and so I wanted to take a moment and just make a quick tutorial on how to warp your loom for anybody that's bought a loom that was in one of my classes and hasn't had an opportunity to take the warping class yet, or maybe for anybody who has had that warping class and just wants a refresher or a resource that they can use. That's what this is for. And so we're going to be warping this loom, videoing this afterwards, and so this is what we're going to be working towards, getting this loom warped for a fairly wide order that I have here, a scarf order. Things that you will need. You're going to need your warping peg. You're going to need your measuring tape. You will need your scissors. I forgot to put those in the picture, but you're going to need scissors. You're going to need some sort of paper. There's wax paper here. I do end up in the video switching to parchment paper just because it's wider, but if you're doing a more narrow project, you can certainly use wax paper or any type of paper that will just separate that warp out as we start to roll it. I prefer to have a bowl to put my yarn in, and also some rubber bands. So you may find that you like to use some rubber bands. Different artists or different weavers are going to have different tips and tricks that they use, and you'll pick up what you like. The way I do it is I just try things. If I like it, I keep it. If I don't, I don't. So, you know, you may find that you like those rubber bands. You may find that you'd rather do it without those. So those are the tools that I start out with and that I use. I gather when I get ready to warp a loom. And so, get those together. I'm going to put up right now sort of the basic steps that we're going to use, and so this might be a good time for you to screenshot this to refer back to, just as a refresher. But these are the basic steps that we're going to go through today as we warp this loom. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to move all this stuff over here. I have my warp. I have my peg planned out to set up 90 inches away from the middle of my loom. That's what I typically like to do. I like a long scarf, and so 90 inches is what I have found I like. You can do whatever. You want a shorter scarf, you can do, you can definitely do something shorter. If you want a longer scarf, do something longer. It is totally up to you. Now, one thing that I do give in that other class, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail right here, is calculating your warp and how much yarn you need and things like that. You need to calculate the length that you want your warp to be. I'm sorry, your finished product to be, any fringe that you have on there. There's about 15 inches of loom waste on these Cricut looms, and so you can kind of calculate that in there as well. If you decide that you need that information and you haven't had that class, that handout I give out in that warping class, if you need that information, just shoot me an email and I'll get that out to you. But I'm not going to go into a ton of detail with that right now. But just so you know, I've got 90 inches on here, and it will probably end up being probably about a 72, 73 inch scarf when I get done. It doesn't have a lot of fringe on it. So, all right. So I've got my peg back here at 90 inches from the midpoint. One thing I have done on my reed, and I've got an 8-dent reed here that I'm using, is I've marked, and I just keep this on here, I've marked the middle of it. You have to decide how wide you want your scarf to be, and it needs to sit in the middle of your reed, or your heddle. You want it in the middle of that. This is called the heddle, but it also serves as our reeds in there. So it's got to sit in the middle. If it's off to one side or another, it's going to be much more difficult to weave and to roll up on the apron rods. So or the cloth beams back here. So one thing that I do is I kind of eyeball it sometimes, and I will count my slots in, and I'll say, okay, I want to go 15 slots in. I'll go 15 slots in this way, 15 slots in this way. The right way to do it, or the most normal, traditional way to do it, would be to find the center. And let's say I'm going to have some draw in. So let's say I want a scarf that's 7 inches wide in the end, I would weave it at about 8 inches. I usually weave about an inch or so bigger than what I want it, because you're going to have some draw in when you start weaving on it. And so I would start in the middle. I'd measure 4 inches over on either side and kind of mark that. Usually I'll just put a little piece of yarn in there and mark that. And so I'll know where I'm stopping and where I'm starting. So I'm going to pause this for just a minute and get that done, and I'll show you guys what I've done on that. Mr. Scissors. Now, I really didn't need to mark this necessarily, because it's going to be such a simple one. But I wanted to show you what that looks like. And so I did go ahead and mark it. Let me put these things in my pockets. If you like aprons, aprons are always good because they have pockets. So, but I have got mine. I'm going to go what I did on mine was 2 slots in, and then I marked that 3rd one. So I know that I'm going to start on the 3rd one in, and I'm going to finish on the 3rd one out. But you can measure this and see how long. I'll tell you, I did not even measure it to see, because I just know I wanted to use as much of my width as I possibly could get away with. So this is about 13.5 inches wide. You really don't ever want to go all the way to the very, very edge of your heddle, just because it gets a little bit difficult for it to roll up and not get caught up in those apron rod strings in the back. So I usually don't go all the way to the edge. I have tried going to the edge before. It works, but I like to stop a little bit before. I find that it just saves me a little bit of a hassle with it. Okay, so I've got that on my loom. Got all my little goodies that I need in my pocket, and so we're going to wrap this first apron rod over the back beam, and then using our break with our break on the on position, we're just going to roll it back to get it where we want it. Now, this is one little trick that I like to do. I like to put a little rubber band right there just to kind of hold it in place. I use hair ties sometimes. I've used my daughter's scrunchies before. You can use all kinds of things. It doesn't have to stay like super tight or anything. It just keeps it from wobbling around. When you're warping your loom, you always want your warp to fall between these these side to apron strings. So you don't want it to go on the outside of those. It needs to go on the inside. So that may mean that you need to push, like if you're doing something wide like mine, you may need to push them out just a little bit. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to tie, make sure you guys can see this. I'm going to go ahead and tie that on there. Real simple tie. Once you have done that, you will take your, not your scissors, you will take your hook, and you're only going to be coming through the slots on this, okay? We're not going to worry about those holes yet. We'll get to those later, but you're going to take your hook and put it through there, hook that, and so you end up with 2. As I'm coming out, it's got 2 on there. I'm going to take it back here to my peg, hook it around that peg. You don't want to pull this super, super tight, but you do want to kind of have some tension on it. You don't want it to be like hanging down big time back there. And you will come in, try not to block everything. You'll come in and get the next one. You'll find it's kind of an over-under kind of feel that you get with that. You want to make sure you're not missing any of those slots, so really pay attention to that. As you're doing this, mine's going to change colors, yours might not. If you wanted to change colors on yours, you can tie off on the back and tie another color on and keep going. You can actually tie off on the peg. I'm not going to go over that just yet because I don't want to confuse you too much. As long as you have 2 threads, 2 pieces of yarn coming through each slot, you can tie off on the back or the front and change colors. What I'm using, this yarn that I'm using actually is a self-gradient yarn, and so it's going to do it for me. Kind of my favorite kind to do. And so this process is just continuing to loop back and forth until you get it all the way across where you're ready to start. Okay, you can see my bowl that's coming out of here. I have gotten a good bit of this warped. I've got a few more to go. Hopefully I won't make anybody seasick as I do these last few, since I've changed my way we're looking at this, my viewpoint.
Good to see you.
Also have a little helper out here with me now. Okay.
Sam's a little helper too.
Just a couple more. It's shifting to kind of a white color. I like it. Okay, this is my last one. You can see that this is where I've tied my string, and I know that this is my last slot that I want to go through. So I'm going to come all the way back to my peg, wrap that around the peg, and I am actually going to finish and tie off on the back of this one. Now, I like to end, I like my final piece, I like both of my end pieces to be in a slot and not a hole. So I'll show you kind of what I do about that. There's a couple of alternatives. You could tie off back there on the peg to do that. Ooh, this is close. You could tie off on the peg, but for this particular one, the way I started doing it and the way I kind of like to do this is I just have an extra string that I let hang out, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get to that point. So I'm just going to tie that on there. Okay, got that there. I can take my rubber bands off now. It's not going to be going anywhere. And I'm going to go down here to the peg, and this is the part that can get a little scary. I'm going to go to the peg and I'm going to pull it off of the peg. See, I have my loops right here. Now, if I've tied off on the peg, I might have knots and things like that. So sometimes when I tie off on the peg, I'll just cut here and cut all the knots and everything off. But I don't have any knots this time, so I'm just going to cut right here in the middle. It does not have to be perfect. We trim things up in the end anyway. And then, oh, I think I missed one. I missed a couple. Okay. And I'm going to take this, and I just do so. A chain to keep them all together. I'll show you kind of what that looks like in the end. Kind of looks like this. The longer your warp is, the more important that little chain is. And really, guys, I like to kind of tie mine on the end, but I'm not going to tie that one this time. So let me show you what we do from this point right here. This is what this is your warp that you're going to be working with. Our goal right now is to get this whole warp wound up onto this back beam, so that we can weave from it. So that just like if you were in my class and you were weaving and you had the warp back here and you just kept advancing it, you got to get it back there so that you can keep advancing it. It's a simple process. If you have someone there with you that can help you, they just need to kind of hold it like this, put a little bit of tension on it, keep it from getting like tangled up or anything like that. And that's really great if you have somebody there to help you. You won't always have someone there to help you, and so 9 times out of 10 I do this all by myself. And so the way that I have learned to do that is I take it up under this front apron rod or cloth beam, and I kind of wrap it around. Now, I had wax paper, but I figured out that my wax paper wasn't long enough because I'm doing such a wide warp this time. So I went in and I found some parchment paper. The good thing about this is you can reuse this paper over and over again. So this is just some parchment paper that I had used for another project, and so it's not wax paper, but either one would work. If you're doing a more narrow warp, it is perfectly fine to use wax paper or something smaller than this. But I need mine to go all the way around everything, so that's what we're doing. All right, so I've got my break on this side over here. Looking at the back of the beam, it's the left side. Got my break on, and I'm going to just start rolling. As I roll, I can kind of, my break came off. As I roll, just gonna hold this in my hand. And I can kind of stop and give it a tug every now and then. That's always good to get that tension right. Once I get to this part, I'm going to stick my parchment paper up in there so that it's got that little barrier that's going to start. Now with the parchment paper, you just kind of want to watch it and make sure it's advancing at the same speed. There we go. And typically what I'll do is, when I'm doing this by myself, is I'll roll it a little bit, I'll stop, I'll gather this and tug it, and maybe roll for a little bit. Okay. Now we've got it sitting in front of us. We've rolled it back onto the back beam. We're going to take this front apron rod, and one thing that I like to make sure is that all of my little knots are on the back side or on the same, that these are all going kind of in the same direction. So you don't want it like flipped where you're seeing this part. You want to be able to see the same thing on each one of them. So we're going to take that and put it over. It's got to actually rest over on top of that. We've got our little break right here, so we can go ahead and be rolling that up some so that it's at a good spot. We want it a few inches in front of that beam, and we're going to take a little bit of time before we do anything else with this. And so each one of your slots right now has 2 threads in it. And so what I do is I kind of look at those and I see which one on the back side looks like it's closer. So this one looks like it's closer to the inside. So I'm going to pick that one and I'm going to pull it through my hole. We'll just keep on doing that. So look at it. Okay, this one's closer. Pull it through my hole. I'm going to do that all the way across until I have everything in one piece in a slot and one piece in a hole. All right, guys, we've got all of our yarn threads, our ends in one in a slot, one in a hole. We're down to the very last one now. I like to have my ends where my selvage edges are going to be, my edges of my weaving. I like for them to be in a slot because they don't get pulled as much as if they're in a hole. The ones in the holes are the ones that are going to move up and down, and so they don't have as much activity put on them. So what I do on the end, when I get over here and I've got this very last one, is I will usually take this very last one, and instead of putting it through the hole, I'll pull it and just lay it over the back of my loom. As I continue to weave, that will kind of get longer. It also gives me a good idea of where I'm at. You could always just do it once and tie off on the peg when you're going, but to me that's just a lot easier. But if you're short on yarn, or you want to, maybe you've got some really expensive yarn that you want to make sure that you're not being wasteful of, you would tie off on the peg instead of having that piece just laid over. Or you could always keep it in that hole and just weave with it in the hole. I just find that the edges seem to be more uniform if I have a slot on this side and a slot on this side for my edges. Okay, so now that we're here, we're going to find the middle. And I typically try to do, just maybe like 4 on each side, a total of 8 strings. Depends on your dent number that you're using on this and how many. Basically, I just try to get about an inch worth of threads. I start in the middle, and you're going to come and you're going to put it. Let me make sure you can see. You're going to put it. I need to give myself a little more slack here. There we go. Pull all these back out. All I did was just release some tension off the back and pull some back. I could have gone from the front and pulled this forward, but I just chose to do it that way. There's not really a right or wrong way there. I'm going to take this and watch carefully as I wrap it. I wrap it that way. And then I just do it twice around here. Go around twice so it's good and tight. And do like that. Now I will work my way on either side. So I will do the middle one first, and then I'll work my way out on both of these. And for this particular one, since it's an 8-dent reed, I'm just doing 4 on each side. And I loop it twice and tie it. I will come back and tighten the tension on all of these a little bit later, but right now I'm just trying to get them all on there. If you're weaving along with me, this is a good time to pause the video. If you're warping along with me, I should say, a good time to pause the video and get this done. Okay, I've got down here on the end, and if I do my 8 strands here, I'm left with just like 3 right there. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm just going to put those 3 with that. Now, one thing that you always want to make sure you're doing as you're tying this onto the front apron string is that you are staying in between, oh, I missed one of my knots, that you're staying in between your strings. Okay, so you don't ever want to go on the outside of this. It's too easy for that to just kind of flop off if you do that. So be careful with that, and just knot that, do that twice. Okay, same thing over here, kind of running into that same problem. This does not have to be exact. If you get 1 too many threads in something, it's not going to be the end of the world. But there again, the nicer and the neater you do things in the beginning, the better it tends to be, the easier it tends to be. So we've got this on here, and I can kind of spread these out a little bit. Now I'm going to come back. If you might be able to notice it's a little more tense here than it is in here. That's just because as we were tying these on, you know, things shift, things move. So start in the middle and work my way around the sides again, just tightening this tension. Now, if you were worried that this was going to come off, I have done this several times this way and it has not come off, but you could always come back and put one more knot on top of these, and then they're not going anywhere. When I first started weaving, that's what I would do, but now I've been trying this method of just looping it twice, and it seems to work, so we're rolling with it. Makes the end process of getting it off a little bit easier. These could potentially be part of your fringe. We're going to put a header, just like we've always done with weaving, but they could potentially be part of your header, so it's not necessarily a waste. Now you can see my tension is much more even on there. So once I've got it to this point, I am ready to start weaving. I can do that one more time. All my tension is about right. If I look at this, oh, don't forget, you also probably want to cut these off. You can cut these off if you want, if they bother you, but you can always double check it. It's always a good idea to do it. You may want to double check it before you get to this point, but at this point it's a good idea to double check it and just make sure as you're looking through that shaft that it looks clean, that you've got one in every hole and one in every slot. You can put it in the up position, you can put it in the down position and check that shaft. You can kind of see through there. You'll see more of that as you get that header in. It kind of starts to separate these out, but this is a good time to just check it and make sure that you've got one in every hole and one in every slot. So that's how when you start weaving, just like that. Up position, down position, and neutral. And at that point, you are good to go.